Hi, welcome back. Today we are listening to Grandmother, and she is gone back to Laos in 1975. What has happened here is after the Americans pulled out of Vietnam, because the Hmong were their ally, or they were allies, um, they had to flee, and a lot of them took to the jungles and then escaped to Thailand, and Grandmother was one of these people. And I kind of inserted myself in Grandmother a little bit here. When I always start my stories when I was traveling. When I was in Sri Lanka, I was at a meditation yoga retreat, and it was during the monsoon season, and I had to go from the meditation hall back to my room. And the objective was to travel back without getting any leeches on me. And I hated the leeches. Like they just disgusted me. So I've inserted this into the novel. They were massive in size, yet when they walked through the jungle, no person, no creature could hear them. They traveled in silence, as if on their tiptoes. Even those aware of an approaching herd were still not privy to the echo of their footsteps, for elephants moved in secret, protected by their magnitude. I dreamt there were a million elephants. I sat on a feathery white puff above them in the sunlight, and I watched their progress as they moved over Laos, claiming ownership of her jungles, vast plains, and plateaus. They walked steadily and with purpose. Their long trunks periodically rested on the earth to read her vibrations. When satisfied all was well, they commenced with swishing tails and floppy ears, so large I could have used them as a blanket. They were magnificent, these creatures. They held me captive on a cloud, and I was content to observe. As the day turned to night and night to day, I sat and witnessed the passing of many elephants, so numerous in quantity I thought them to be the pride of our nation. In my dream, when I finally abandoned my pillow for the earth, the elephants were gone, and all that remained were the indentations of their footsteps. I stepped inside one of such footsteps, and the elephant's energy traveled up my legs until it became lost in my body. At that moment, I knew the elephants were as much a part of Laos as I was. In the land of a million elephants, I am Hmong, and Hmong means free. Yet I did not feel free. I felt imprisoned by the circumstances that surrounded me and that ultimately swallowed me and my people. We were chewed up and then spat on the ground like a foul-tasting meat. Before we could regenerate, we were shredded by the claws that hunted us. We remained what was left and for whatever lay in wait. How does one describe the death of hope? For me, it was like my stomach crashed into the root of my spine. Its splinters sprang around me until I was buried so far down there was no way to dig myself free. My tears were so heavy that they sunk me into deeper blackness. I felt death hovering, inviting my spirit to join, and it was tempting. It seemed less fearful than what the future held. I considered accepting the invitation, but the strength of the will to survive found me. The day that none of us anticipated happened. The Americans left. They took their endless supply of guns, money, expertise, our top military officials, and their families. Fighting planes turned away in mid-flight, and left our men on the ground in the midst of battle, looking up to watch our allies abandon us. Was there a word to describe the despair our men felt watching hope fly away? There was not. When the Americans left in 1975, our world was shattered, for we had supported the Americans, and that left us vulnerable to the communists. Bao, because your grandfather and father had fought alongside the Americans, we knew we had to leave. But there was no easy way to leave. Remaining in Laos would mean persecution. The Laotian government publicly announced that anyone who had supported the Americans would die. Almost immediately, Hmong villages that were suspected of supporting the Americans were burned to the ground. Men, women, and children were raped and killed. We had to abandon everything that was familiar, the only life that we had known. Although we had always known hardship, there was comfort in the predictability of knowing the crop cycles. There was 3 meals a day. We knew this. There was comfort. We had been taught by our parents, who had been taught by their parents, how to plant crops and survive. This was an uncomplicated life we led. Hard, but uncomplicated. I used to love the spirit of the rain because it brought life. I used to stand on the side of the mountain and watch the rains pour. They would pour life into the terrain, softening the brittle brown grasses to green. The longer I stood, my diligence was rewarded with the transformation of an entire landscape that became carpeted in various shades of green and alive with mounds of texture. The smell of wet soil and thatch was the freshness to come. After the Americans left, the rains changed. Sometimes yellow poured over the landscape, and when it finished, our people were overcome with dizziness and nausea. For some, these symptoms escalated, causing vomiting and diarrhea that even the most powerful shaman could not stop. Their soul is lost in the spirit world, and I cannot bring it back, the shaman would whisper, while vomit and diarrhea poured from their bodies. Then, when no more liquid could escape, the bodies appeared to be sucked up inside themselves until they shriveled and died. When the communist rains were not yellow, they were sometimes black. Large black drops that emitted a poisonous vapor. The vapor stretched its arms wide, reaching for the lungs of those who breathed the surrounding air. The reaction was quick. Within 3 hours of inhalation, people suffocated. For those fortunate to escape, illness caught up with them when they drank water from nearby streams, or when they ate rice and vegetables cultivated from the soil that had been watered by black rain. Suffering was everywhere. Living was a prospect riddled by fear. The airplane rains spewed out trails of colored smoke that manifested in dizziness, headaches, and vomiting. There were also airplanes that blasted poison nails. To this day, the sound of an airplane flying overhead stirs a sickness deep within my belly, and I feel as though the air is thin around me. I can see a thin layer of blackness creeping towards me, and my feet refuse to run. I hold my breath, fearful, but my lungs refuse to hold clean air in. The thin, velvety blackness sways back and forth, as if attempting to charm its prey before it strikes. I scream inside my head as the black vapor slithers up my nostrils, into my eyes, and into my ears, filling me with black smoke until the top of my head combusts in a gust of orange flame. My body burns from the inside out. My ashes melt into the ground. I incinerate into a large pile that covers the ground and sinks into the innocent earth. Others are carried off by the winds. The fire follows me, and together we corrupt the sweetness of the earth. I try to stop the poisonous fire from spreading, but it laughs joyfully, eating up everything in its way, and in leaving an invisible trail of poison that sits and waits for the next thirsty person or animal to quench its thirst. When I open my eyes, the airplane is long gone, and my lungs struggle to process the limited air I am able to squeeze in. Only hours later am I able to breathe properly. You were born in the jungle, released from your mother's womb when we were fleeing from the communists. Bao, you came in the night, your mother pausing only long enough to push you out. She did not know if she had a girl or a boy, as there was no time. Before your first cry could fully cut through the muteness, she placed opium under your tongue. That first incomplete wail was the only time I heard you cry during our exodus. It was the only cry the group would tolerate. There had been other babies whose cries would stop the hearts of those in flight and alert the inhabitants who were close by. A curious civet would balance on a branch from above, its long tail trailing behind, its shining eyes unblinking as it peered down at the wailing that traveled upwards to smack it in its face. Even the blackness could not camouflage the baby's cries. It threw the cries even further into the night. In the distance, the periodic bark of a deer would halt. An unnatural quiet would fall upon the forest as tiny human cries continued to amplify as any sound does when all is supposed to be silent. The smallest and most helpless threatened the existence of others. It was a risk that could not and would not be taken. Fear would quickly turn to agitation, and even the most loving hands could turn mad. To prevent detection, parents did as your mother. All too often, doses of opium were misjudged. The rapid beating of tiny hearts would slow until breath was no longer felt against a mother's chest. And the baby's skin would turn cold. Its mother would continue walking, holding her dead baby for just a little longer. Other parents were not as fortunate, and overdoses were quick and violent. Blood spewed from small lips and dribbled down chins. Death followed before the blood could drip further. Parents who were unwilling to give their child opium were cast aside, along with those who were injured, too sick, or too old to travel. I remember the faces of people sitting with their backs up against a tree, a rifle in hand waiting to defend if its owner still had the strength to pull the trigger when the time came. While we walked, I shone my American flashlight into your face, anxiously monitoring your response to the opium, and your mother walked oblivious to the dripping afterbirth. We walked until the sun rolled her way up into the sky, and then we hid among the leaves, waiting for the sun to drop so we could resume. On the third day after your birth, your mother was anxious to call your third soul into your body. I know you are wondering what this means. We believe that there are 3 souls, Bao. The first soul enters the body after the parents have made the child. This soul stays with the body. The second soul enters after the baby is born and takes its first breath. And this soul also wanders while we sleep. The third soul needs to be called into the body, and it has a very important job of protecting the body. If the soul cannot be called, the child may become ill, so it is important to get all of the souls into the body so the body will be balanced and there will be harmony. Because we were hiding, we couldn't sacrifice an animal and do a proper calling of the soul and naming, but we did our best. We whispered blessings and welcomed you to our family, my dear Bao. And we remembered a conversation when we were free about a beautiful wall of blue, and we named you as we wished, Bao. We walked for 95 days, tunneling our way through mosquitoes and through pathless forest that fought our process at every step. The men took turns at the front, chopping at the denseness. I felt small. If I looked up, I was not greeted by the sun's warmth or the sky's blue. The trees that towered above me enclosed me in darkness. I felt like a tiny ant stuck in the middle of a poppy field, and I could not see where I was going or where I had come from. We walked, we hid, we walked. We ate when we could, fearful that our fires and clanking pots would give our location away. Usually we would resort to eating bugs, lizards, or big potatoes. We slept if we could, but sleep came hard when the spirit was eroded by fear. Physically, our bodies decayed. My feet swelled with blisters that oozed and bled as I tread over mountains, rice fields, and flatlands. I had never known such hunger before and became acquainted with the ravenous tugs that lingered in my stomach, begging to be fed. On my back, I carried a stack of rice, an extra set of clothes, and hidden beneath some of the silver jewelry I had worn at my wedding. I also had some money and a few silver bars. It was all I could carry, and the weight of the basket bore down on my shoulders until the pain traveled through my back and neck. My body seized with cramps and screaming aches as though I had been beaten with a stick. I could not think about when it would all be over, because when I did, I became overwhelmed. Every next step seemed a distant impossibility, and I did not know how many more steps I had to take. I lived by keeping my head down and my eyes focused on the ground. I spoke to my feet and I commanded them to move, one step at a time, one breath at a time. Head down, keep moving, ignore the pain, forget the fear. Walk, walk, walk. When the rains came, my mind had to work harder to overcome the obstacles that presided with the constant cold and wetness. At first, there was some relief to have the sweat and dirt washed away. However, after hours, what was once pleasurable became an irritant. The incessant drilling of water into my flesh had my skin throbbing with an itch that made me want to peel the layers of my skin off. Forget about the rain, I instructed myself. Forget. Forget. One step at a time, one breath at a time. Gentle, careful, careful. Each squelching step was trodden with the anxiety of falling. The rains coated the earth in a slippery sheen, and I fought to maintain my balance. My stomach pinched from trying to anchor my weight evenly. I traveled uphill on my knees, my hands digging into the slick red group to grasp at anything to prevent my falling. Unsuccessful, I tumbled backwards, sliding into the person behind me, and he into the next. The three of us lay defeated in a tangled heap at the bottom, looking back to where we had just come from. Frustration spilled onto our determined cheeks, and we began the steep ascent for the second time. It would not be the only fall. There would be more. Later in the day, I would slide on my bum, and a trail of mud collected between my thighs on the way down. In the back of my throat, silent screams tormented me, just as the leeches stuck to my legs. I just wanted to be dry. I did not want to walk anymore, and I wanted the leeches to go away. I felt them before I saw them, the slight stinging on my flesh that announced their arrival. Sometimes I felt their swiftness as they darted up my leg in a race to seal themselves to my skin so that they could suck my blood. And I wanted to vomit. I wanted to cry. I hated the sucky little bodies that stretched over my toes in excitement before taking their meal. I tried to remember a time when I thought the sound of the rain beautiful, when I could sit and listen to its endless patter and take comfort in its rhythm. During that time, I hated the rain because I knew what it brought. As soon as it started, my heart sank to my toes and dread churned like deadly waves in my stomach. I helplessly tried to avoid the puddles and the drenched branches that smacked into my face. I could not see the creatures I detested, but I knew they were there, waiting for flesh to be fed upon. I watched my feet as they touched the ground. With each step, I waited to feel a leech lock onto me, grateful when they did not. But I did not allow myself to feel relief because I needed to put my foot down again and again. My shoulders rode up my ears. Actually, mine are doing it right now. For I knew it to be only a matter of time before another leech found me. When they did, my body revolted, causing me to flare in disgust. How could something so small cause so much distress? My fear of them was larger than me. It grew with every rain, with every sopping step. If I could have cut off my foot, I would have. The others said they were used to them and flicked them off haphazardly. Yet I struggled and found that once the leech had been dislodged from my body, it stuck to my flicking finger. I watched it coil from my bandus and twine around my finger, reluctant to give up the skin which it had so firmly fastened itself to. I beat at it with my free finger until it was unceremoniously propelled and I was once again free. I was afraid they would climb inside me, that I would feel them moving and there would be no way that I could get them out and they would live inside me, growing bigger and bigger, sucking on me until my insides were filled with leeches and there was nothing left of me. It terrified me. It sickened me. I spent hours examining my body to ensure I was free of them. My fear of these small creatures continued to grow larger than the sea. Every waking moment was spent fearing these tiny creatures that could not kill me. There was no escape. They were everywhere. Every fear I ever had became wrapped in the leeches' grotesque bodies. I grew to fear them more than the communists, more than the prospect of falling into their hands, more than dying. It was not until I chose to deal with my leeches that the mist began to lift from my spirit. When I decided to speak with the leeches listened. They still came to feed on me, but this time when they did, I acknowledged their presence on my toes, ankles, and legs and dealt with them. I removed the intruders from my body with a firm flick and sent them hurling into the jungle. If I did not have time to stop, I let them suck until they fell from my body full of blood. The leeches were my first victory, as there were more fears to come. I really hate leeches, but I can't imagine the mindset of these refugees freeing and the circumstances that they have to live. And of course, these are circumstances that are still persistent today. You know, we see it in Syria, and I just have so much respect for people who are so brave to flee and come to a better place. So thank you very much for listening to Grandmother. And tomorrow, we'll find out what happens to Grandmother.